Hello, everyone, and welcome back for the Art Camp 3 Week 5 Critique. Um, yeah, sorry we're getting started a little bit late here, and hopefully we got everything set up all right. I don't have my usual setup this week, so um, if you guys can hear me all right, that's fantastic, and just let me know if you can. And then we'll start diving into all of the paint overs for this week. So I have a lot of homework to get through. I think we have something like 50 files or something. So I'll move through these at least a reasonable pace. But of course, there's a lots of um, pretty good quantity of studies from everyone this week. So yeah, should be good. Um, yeah. So we'll just dive in here, and I'll try to do everyone's sort of lighting critiques, uh, looking at all of their different assignments, um, so I can get a general idea of kind of the things that they need to work on. Um, so these are overall looking really nice. They look really good. Let's see here. Think about exactly what to say here. Always takes my brain a little while to get into the critique mode. Let's see here. I think overall, I think you did a really good job of getting these lighting schemes working actually really well. See any general things, but I think for the most part, you're getting it really nice. I think there's just primarily a little bit of mm, not so much in those, but I think in some of them, there's a bit of a lacking of some of the atmosphere in some of them. Like you did a great job on these, and they feel really good for what they should be. I think they're pretty spot on as far as color goes. But I think in some of the other ones, you sort of miss out on some of the atmosphere that you can be getting in here. So I think in an effort to try to get the right color here, you sort of zoomed in with your vision anyway, on certain colors and values and stuff like that. And because of that, they feel just a little bit off. They feel a little bit too dark. And um, I can certainly understand the the kind of push to go in that direction, because it's pretty natural to do that. But you have to be wary of um, concentrating so much on the color and whatnot, and kind of missing out on the atmospheric perspective stuff that we've learned so much of. Because even though all of this lighting stuff is happening, that atmospheric perspective is always in play. So I think remembering just how much atmosphere is here, and realizing that it's not always um, entirely accurate in a photo. And sometimes you do have to kind of push the atmosphere perhaps a little bit more than what you're seeing in the photos. So, but again, very small thing. I think overall, feeling pretty good. But I think there's some of that atmospheric effects that I think you're missing out on just a little bit. Like even here, it feels like you got blues and you got greens, but the problem is that I think that your blues need to shift a little bit more towards green, and your blues need, or sorry, your greens need to shift a little bit more towards blue. So for here, these greens that you're actually seeing here aren't so much pure greens as they are kind of grayish, bluish greens. Um, and I think if you shift things in kind of that direction, I think you'll be amazed at how this looks. And so again, if you take some of the kind of lighter colors for these blues and instead make them perhaps a little bit greener and grayer, I think you'll see a lot more accurate color that way. I think for you, it's just these tiny little tweaks of color, of making sure that you're getting in these accurate colors. Not, I guess, painting what color you think things are, but really, really paying attention to what they are. what effects atmosphere have on those colors. So a fairly small tweak there, but I think it's all right. Um, uh, there's a few other small things as relates to edges and whatnot, but I think for color studies you're doing just fine, because for the most part your colors are pretty accurate. And this one, for instance, is another example of I think the need to push the atmosphere is fairly important as well, because even though it feels like it's all pretty flat, there is a major separation between the foreground here and the background in terms of the values and the colors. And so that's the same thing that I talked about before. Of you definitely have a kind of darker value range in this foreground, but you need to make sure that as you're getting into all the different values and colors in the background, that you don't get too far out of that range that you've established, and make the background kind of come into the foreground. So I think you're getting a little too dark with some of your background elements. Uh, Missing out a little bit on the light values here. It's a pretty bright little spotlight going on right there. It's kind of a break from all the diffuse lighting happening. So there actually is a little bit of a spotlight effect happening. And I think you can kick up those values a little bit. And again, just making sure that your darks aren't getting too dark back here, and watching to make sure that no matter what, the primary things of, atmospheric perspective are still applying, no matter what kind of colors and stuff you have going on in the scene. But overall, looking really nice. Um, yeah, pretty tiny little tweaks, but I think they add that little extra level of refinement that you could use. But yeah, really nice stuff. Oh right, these are wait. Oh, I confused myself. Yeah, this is, sorry, different artist. No wonder it looks different. Um, my brain again has not entirely turned on yet. Um, all right. Yeah, these are looking really nice. Yeah, they look really good. They feel pretty much right. Trying to think if there's much to really say here. Perhaps uh, perhaps it's getting a little bit dark in some of the shadows here, and feeling a bit off. And again, that can be partially the fault of reference in following photographic reference a bit too much, and which is why we always have to be careful when we're following that. In that, we need to make sure that it feels natural for a landscape. And right now, it feels like your shadows are just getting a little too dark here, and a bit in the other ones on the bottom as well. In that, if you look at this sky, it's incredibly bright blue sky, whereas you're not getting much of any of that in the shadows. You're barely getting any blue or any light at all. So I think it's one of those things of either darkening the sky just a little bit to make it feel a bit more in range, or bringing in some more lights into your shadows, to make it feel like it's part of the same world. Um, and this is again not a problem with probably how you're looking at the reference, because this is probably what was in the reference. It's probably the value range you saw in the reference. But as I said before, with dealing with reference, you always have to be conscious of what the problems with those reference photos are. And obviously, being one of my reference photos, I can tell you that even they have problems of not always being 100% accurate to what you would see if you were standing there, and what you would need to paint if you want to paint that accurately. So for this one, I feel like you could probably get some more light in the shadows, or darken the sky down a little bit, whichever one you think works better. They'll have somewhat different effects to them, but making sure that those values don't get too dark in relation to a really bright sky here. It doesn't make as much sense to have such dark darks, It makes more sense, obviously, when you have a very nighttime, dark kind of scene going on. It even makes sense in kind of a sunset shot, but when it feels like the sky is just a bright blue sky, it tends to get a little bit off. I really like what you did actually with the intense like top lit one here. I actually think you did a really good job handling that, and it's a fairly difficult thing to study, and I think you actually did a really great job on that. So, all right. So again, just tiny little things, but fairly important. So these are okay. So these we have a bunch of these submitted a bunch of files. So that's a good thing. So we'll flip through them first and take a look at them, and then I'll dive into a couple and I'll give some thoughts on things. Just want to some stuff first. Um, so looking good overall. I think just see what we got first. All right. Yeah. Yeah, I think there's kind of a couple things that I'm seeing here that are happening a fair bit. And yeah, yeah, I think there's kind of like two, yeah, probably two things that I see kind of repeated here in all of these, um, and that is, it seems like feels like you're missing out on a little bit of the blue values, and missing out on seeing some of those blue shadows and stuff like that, and in a fair number of these. And then I think you're exaggerating some of your light values in other areas, and particularly light values on the ground. But sometimes I think you're getting tripped up by some of the reference that is a bit blown out and stuff. Because even on photos like this that do have a blown out sky, I think it's an important thing to analyze in that. Uh, yeah, I think it's an important thing to notice because a lot of photos that we are going to use do have fairly blown out skies, and how do we handle that? How do we handle painting something that actually is really blown out? And so I guess you kind of take some of the knowledge you've been uh, gathering in the past few weeks and start to instead kind of inform some of your decisions there of realizing that yes, there will be a sky up there, and yes, there will be a sky gradient, and there will be values up in there as well. So I would say to darken down your skies if they're getting so blown out like that, and I think some of that's happening there. And then I think you're missing out on some of the really nice warmth that's happening, and that's part of what's giving this such a nice effect. And it's caused by a lot of bounce light and some of the bloom effects of looking into the sun. And so actually, in this case, reducing some of your contrast will, I think, kind of help your sense of lighting, as we kind of talked about in the demo a fair bit. And I think if I just bring in some of this kind of nice warm orange bounce light that's happening in here, you'll see some of that start to play up right there. And bringing in and making sure that this light here is not just white. Realizing that it does have some variation to it, realizing it does have some color temperature to it, and paying attention to that. I think overall, again, it feels pretty good. I think you're just missing some of that, and then I think in general, you're missing out on some of the kind of more bluish colors in the distance. And you can see it a bit on that one, but I think some of the other ones are better examples of that. So, for instance, like this one here, this is a good example of that happening. And you can see just how blue these distant things are getting, and it's what is making this thing feel so far away that everything in this is tinted towards this blue. And when you're painting distant stuff, you have to have all these different colors and values and stuff like that. But they all live within this range of kind of blue tinted colors. So rather than just painting what colors actually would be there, we have to kind of shift our whole thinking towards that blue end of the spectrum. And so we have to compress all these different colors into kind of a relative color range that looks, in general, more bluish, more blue toned. Even when things, might appear like a warm color or something like that, they're often much more desaturated than we would think. And then the blues are often much bluer than we're seeing. So if you shift everything kind of in that direction, I think you'll make things feel a bit more at the scale they should. Because as it was, these things were coming a bit too close, um, perceptibly to your vision. So I think I'd try to push those back a bit. I think that'll work better. But I think that's just kind of some general advice there. And then lastly, I think you're going a little bit too far with some of your light values, and I think you're blowing things out because of that. When really, a lot of these values are actually uh, pretty tight. They're definitely a lighter value than all the trees and stuff around them. But you don't want to go so bright that it feels out of place there. So yes, it will definitely be bright, but it's still got color to it, and it's still got information in there. So don't go too far with some of your bright values when you're dealing with ground. It's pretty rare that ground is going to be so bright. Um, there will be cases, obviously, when you're dealing with snow and whatnot. But for the most part, stuff like this is actually a bit darker than you might think. And, if you just bring this back in the same value range a little bit, you'll start to see that come into play, where just bringing these values a little closer to uh, everything else in the picture will make it feel a little bit more grounded and a bit less disjointed, which I think is something you were struggling with a little bit there. I think you had the colors overall right, but I think it's just that was tripping up a little bit there. And then again, I think the distance is just needs to have that atmosphere in there. And I think you need to be a bit more careful with observing these blue tones. And I think in general, things are a bit bluer than you're thinking they are. So try to push in the future to see those blues even more. And so really, really pay attention to how blue things are getting. When you're dealing with huge amounts of distance, and particularly areas that have certain qualities to the air, things get really, really blue. Um, and distant mountains and stuff get really blue. So don't be afraid to go a fair bit bluer than what you're doing. Things are bluer than you think. So yeah, shift things just a little bit that direction, and I think you'll be impressed with how much more depth you're getting in your work because of that. So, more blue. Shadows are often very, very blue in landscapes. And then, in addition to that, as you start to get atmospheric perspective in there, things can become very, very blue, and they can become almost really deep, rich blues as well. I think that's about it for that one. Um, yeah, so I think that's kind of covers the general advice I would give you. It's, again, watching out for your blues, making sure the atmospheric perspective is in mind, and being careful, I guess, with your reference and making sure that it's not throwing you off. And then making sure that your light values are also not too far out of range. Like for instance, here on the bottom again, I think the light values on the ground are a little bit too exaggerated and are making it feel a little disjointed. You might notice that this just feels a little too contrasty in places, and I think part of that is actually your light values here have gotten too light, and they need to be brought back a little more into the range you've set up here. And so rather than actually adding much light to your shadows, I think I would darken down your lights a fair bit, and then they'll feel more like a ground. So even just doing that quick paint over there makes it feel like this whole thing is much more grounded. So I think that's about it for what I would say for you. Oh, and yeah, for anyone asking about the download link, sorry it's not up yet. I'm working on doing it. The upload kept failing yesterday, and my internet was being awful. And I'm going to try again today to get that up. So I'm sure I'll be able to do that, and we'll be able to actually let you guys download the video and not just stream it. So I'll get that up for you guys soon. All right, so got some shorter studies and then a longer study here. All right. I think overall looking good. I think you probably have a bit of the same thing of not going blue enough in the distance. It feels like you're a little too tentative, excuse me, with how blue things are getting. I think there should be a bit more atmosphere happening. Um, like, you're seeing these values and you're seeing how far away they are, but you're missing out on this slight blue tint that's happening everywhere. And I think there's just a bit more than what you're showing here, where things are just shifting ever so slightly more towards blue, getting a bit more color in those shadows, and then shifting, I guess, some of the lights, not as much as the darks, into that blue range. You are getting a fair bit of atmosphere here. So always making sure that you're getting in enough blues there. And same goes for the bottom one. You're not getting quite enough blue to make it feel like the immense distance that you're seeing here. And all right, so for the longer study, look at this. I think some of the problem you're having with this, it looks good, but I think part of the problem is that the photo I think is a little bit off, in that it is a photograph, and because of that, it has some color and light problems to it. So, for instance, the shadows here are extremely dense. They're extremely dense shadows. When you've got a bright blue scene here, and bright sky and bright ground, and pretty strong lighting too, and you've done some work to counteract that, but I think because your photograph was actually shifted a little bit too cold here, and that the values are a little bit off compared to what you're seeing, you're actually not getting enough blue in the rocks themselves here. It just doesn't feel like there's much of any blue light coming into really any of this, when I think there actually should be a bit more blue being brought into this. Um, Seems to be the theme for today so far is more blue, because I'm pretty sure, again, not standing there at the time, that there would be a little bit more light in these shadows, and more light brought in by this blue skylight, because you've got a lot of light coming in from that sky, and I would think that it would be a bit more filled in with light. And then I think there would also be a bit more of that bounce light that we talked about, because you've got a really dense shadow here on the right, but no light whatsoever going in there. And I think you would have at least a fair bit of bounce light filling in this shadow. So I think that might be something to just kind of keep in mind as you're doing your studies, is that if you ever find a shadow that feels too dark or too dense or doesn't have enough detail or light or anything in it, I would start to try to figure out, just mentally, what kind of light would be going in there, what kind of light maybe the camera is not picking up. And it might be a mix of both. Like at the bottom here, you actually might get a little bit of blue skylight as well. So maybe the bottom of this shadow is actually a bit bluer and then shifting into some bounce light up above or something like that. Whatever it might be, pushing things a little outside of what you're seeing in the photo, to bring in some more light into your things, because you're not just studying color. Um, part of what I tried to get across in the lesson is an understanding of light and an understanding of what's happening. And then when you're doing these studies, you're certainly studying the colors and you're studying the lighting that you're seeing, but you're bringing with you that sense of understanding of what's happening here. And with that understanding, you can push and pull things as they need to be, to get in um, more of that light, more of that sense of light. And part of that is making sure that these shadows don't get too dense and flat and stuff like that. So thinking about how the lighting is going to fill in those shadows, what kind of light is going to reach those, and then whether you're seeing it in the reference or not, bringing it into your study and pushing the lighting like that, because this feels like it has more color and light to it, just because I added in a little bit of blue and a little bit of bounce light and didn't even go that far with it. Um, but it's just recognizing that this photo just doesn't have much information in here. There's almost nothing happening in here. It's almost just pure black in here. Yeah, it actually is pure black. Actually, if you just color pick it, it actually is 100% pure black. And there's no way, of course, in nature that anything close to that would really happen. So again, just being careful with what you're studying, making sure that what you're studying is not throwing you off, and when it is throwing you off, recognizing that and recognizing where you need to push and pull things to get it a little closer to the range of what reality is. Um, so, so got a nice long study here. This is looking really, really nice. Um, you did a really good job with it. It's got a beautiful variety of color here and a great sense of light. And I think there's just really a couple things that would push this into a really great territory. I think one of the things is that you could go a little bit further with your light value range. I think you've still got some room in those light values, particularly in the sky. I have a feeling that your lights on the ground are bright enough, but obviously not seeing your reference, I'm guessing that you actually have a bit more range in your sky values, to push things just a little bit more. Obviously, you don't want to go so far that you're shifting things into white and you're missing some of the color of the light values. But I think there's a bit more range of values that you can use up there, to push it, because I think part of what is happening here that could be a little bit stronger is a wider range of values. And I don't want to go wide with everywhere. I don't want to go full value range everywhere, because that's not what we're shooting for, and that's not what's going to give us a sense of light. We do want this smaller value range. So I think pushing the lights a little bit in the sky, um, to make that feel just a little brighter and make that pop a bit more. And then I think it's bringing in actually a little bit more dark as well, just in a couple spots. And so just in a couple of these crevices and stuff like that in the foreground, um, to really show that this is not washed out, I guess. There's only going to be a couple areas that are going to have some darker values, but even just a couple little tiny, 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 tiny little marks of darker value will make this whole thing feel much brighter. Because rather than it seeming like it's faded out, it will feel like this actually is the full range and that there's just a lot of light in the scene. And by showing us how far the value range can go and establishing that there is a full value range, we'll get a greater sense of the light. So you can already see that just by putting in just these tiny little notes of dark value into this rock here, it gives a greater sense of light for the whole scene. Interestingly enough, in that it's showing us that there is more value in this whole thing. So to push your values just a little bit more in that direction. But I think overall you did a fantastic job. And yeah, I mean this feels really good. You got a great sense of lighting and color here, and feels great. Yeah. Cool. So moving on, got some shorter studies here and some longer studies. All right, so looking really good. Nice, nice. Yeah, I think looking really good overall. Um, let's see here. How much do I have to say about those? Yeah. All right. So a few things. First of all, again, just like the other one that we talked about, being careful of these shadows that are just getting too dense, and being wary of that, and making sure that with something like this that has such strong lighting, uh, being sure that we're bringing in enough bounce lighting in here. And again, very subtle, not even shifting your colors that much or your values that much, but just tiny adjustments um, to these values to just imply a bit more warmth being brought in there, because almost certainly there's going to be some more color in these shadows than what you're seeing in a photograph. And so artificially going in there, adding in just here a bit of warmth. It seems like most of these shadows are not being hit by a lot of skylight, and they would probably just get a little bit of bounce light in there. So probably fairly warm light going in there. Um, and just adding in a touch of that um, to help it make a bit more sense there. I think it was just getting a little too contrasty. And then I think this could be a bit bluer over here. Again, recognizing how blue things get in the distance. Same goes for here, in that right here you've actually got a fair bit of distance here, and there's a lot of atmosphere going on here. And so making sure that you're seeing just how blue things are getting as they get further and further away. And in general, from what I'm seeing here, people are not seeing how blue things actually do get. Things get fairly blue. Um, Things get very, very cool, and the whole color and value range shifts into this bluish spectrum. So yeah, you did a really good job with this one over here on the right, but I think for the other ones you could shift a bit more towards blue, and really even this one could have a bit more of that blue tones. Like your shadows feel about right, and even some of your lights feel about right, but I think they could even shift a little cooler and bringing in a bit more of that coolness. So seeing where the values transition from light into shadow, you can actually see how much color there is on that transition, and you're actually going to get a fair bit of the saturation of color there, and you're going to get a fair bit cooler tones there. So that's actually where you get a lot of the greenness of these leaves and stuff is on that transition. And if you really, really pay attention to that transition and making sure that it's getting cold enough, I think you'll be much happier with what you're doing there. And then actually, I think you went a little too light with some of your values as well. Now that I'm looking at it, making sure that they feel part of the same world. And if you've got this ground established at a certain value, making sure that the shadows and ground relate to one another. And then looking at the longer study, it's overall really nice. Not too much to say. I think it's just tiny tweaks with with the colors. So for here, you've got a lot of warmth back here, and the photo's a little blown out. You can blame the photographer for that one, but there is a lot of warmth, and you can see the evidence of that warmth. And you can see the evidence of that warmth in how it's hitting the water, and in how it's hitting the ground, and some of this bloom effect that's going on back here. And it's important to get that warmth, not just because it looks cool, because it does look cool, but it's also what's going to help all the other colors in our piece feel more right. Because by establishing how warm things can be, the rest of it will feel like it's more diffuse cold lighting by comparison. So going in here, making sure that we're getting in the warmth of this light. And if our photo is a little bit blown out, we can actually darken the values a little so that we are getting in enough value range into our sky to do that. I think overall it is a little bright in general. I think you could actually go a touch darker with a lot of your values and be all right for that. Again, I think a bit more atmosphere. You've got it good on this mountain here, but as you're getting down into the ocean here, and these rocks that are going into the water, I think you went a little too dark. Again, it's the problem with looking too closely at things, because as you look closer and closer and closer, you see all the contrast and the tiny contrasts and the local contrast of things, and you miss out on how those contrasts sit in the overall scene. And if you just kind of squint at the overall scene, this whole little cliff back here in the background is within a very small value range. And making sure that as you're painting it, your darks aren't getting too dark and your lights aren't getting too light. So not pushing the contrast as much. So, and then just a general thing, but I'd also watch your perspective a bit more. I know it doesn't relate to a color study, but it's still going to bother me, and I'm still going to point it out. But just watching your perspective and making sure that you're not doing the thing that we all tend to do, which is tilting things. So tilting them towards you, so seeing more of the top of forms and not enough of the side of forms. So you've done that there of not having enough of the side of this form and exaggerating what you see of the top of it. So you're actually seeing very little of the top of this form, and a whole lot of the side of it. So making sure that you're getting that in there, and that's correct. So again, not really relating to the color and lighting, but very important all the same. But yeah, I think aside from that, feels pretty good. Yeah, so just focusing a little bit more on the warmth, making sure that you're getting in the atmosphere you need, and going from there. So got some faster studies and a nice long study. All right, these are looking really nice. You did a really good job with these. The lighting feels accurate. It feels natural. You did a good job with handling the atmosphere. Um, this one here in the upper right is just beautiful, but also thankful for having like really nice lighting in the photo, I'm sure, but you did a really good job of handling these shadows and making sure that they're filled with all this nice, warm, purple, beautiful light. It's really nicely done. You did a great job with that. I think on your long study, I actually see some problems with that, in that I think as you continued to study it, you lost you lost some of the light that I'm sure you actually observed early on. I think you got so far into the smaller aspects of the color and the more tiny intricacies of it that I actually think you lost some of the overall impact of the lighting. And the thing is that when I gave you these assignments to do these quick ones, um, it was important because you need to realize that as you do longer ones, whether they're longer studies or longer paintings and stuff like that, that you don't want to ever lose the sense of light and color that you're getting in these early things. And we'll see that a lot as we get into creating our own lighting schemes and whatnot. Because as we do that, we'll be doing these color sketches and maintaining that color and maintaining the light that we're going to establish early on in our pieces is absolutely essential. And I think for some of this, again, not seeing the reference, but I think just based on what I would guess of this lighting, I think you actually lost some of the lighting because you got so far in here with these local contrasts and stuff like that that you lost the overall impact. And if I just go in here and quickly actually simplify things that you have, um, that the sense of lighting that I'm sure you had early on um, is going to kind of come back. And this is a pretty natural thing to happen, is that it's very easy to lose things that happen early on um, as we progress with the piece more, because we start to see more and more little tiny contrasts and more tiny shifts of color and stuff like that, and we start putting those in there and putting those in there and putting those in there, and without realizing it, we go way too far with those. We put in too much contrast of things. We make the everything a little too exaggerated, and we very, very quickly lose that wonderful things that we had early on in the piece. And I think that's kind of what happened to you, is that, for instance, on this far one, you saw that it was darker, and so you made it darker, but you made it way too dark. When in fact, I'm almost certain that it's a much more subtle darkness there. It's a very subtle effect there. And same goes for the darks that are affecting these light sides of the forms. I'm sure you saw some dark forms, but again, I think you just exaggerated them and you pushed them too far, and then because of that, lost some of the light that you were getting in there. And so just by bringing this back into more simplified form, we start to get in some of the light that you really had in there and get that sense of light going again. So it's certainly not a problem with your ability to observe lighting, because clearly from the short studies you did, it's uh, well within your range to really, really capture some great lighting effects and stuff like that. But I think for you, I think it's good that you did this long study, because it shows that one thing that you need to work on is that as you continue with the piece, that you are always aware of this overall effect that you're getting early on, and that some of the contrast here on the trees, look how contrasty they're getting. Odds are they're probably not that intense, whereas in every other one you're maintaining this great sense of value and lighting and stuff like that in every element of it. So pushing these lights back into a more reasonable range for what these probably looked like, um, uh, all for the overall effect. So always concerning yourself with that first and foremost, and then having the smaller, um, subtle gradations of value and color and stuff like that coming after that, and making sure that they're not throwing off your overall effect. So the idea is that as you zoom out, whether you have a long study or a short study, they should have the exact same sense of light. And so, moving on. Looking good. Let's see here. Let's see what I can say. I think you're looking good overall. Yeah, I think there's just some fairly small things about um, mainly some color temperature things that I think are making things feel off. I think you're going a touch. Well, actually, it varies. So in the top one, I think you went to blue with the background, which in turn threw off your foreground because you made the trees too blue and not yellow enough. And then in the second one, I think you actually made some of the distance too purple, and lost some of the nice kind of warmth that is happening in this. So I think shifting this a little further away from purple and more towards kind of this grayish, tealish blue that you're seeing here. And as you do that, the greens you'll start to see um, are a bit of a different color as well. I think it's kind of one thing that led to another, and that's often the case with color and lighting and whatnot, because it's all extremely relative. Everything looks like a certain color because it's next to another color. And so I think by making these shadows on the mountain too purple, you've made some of the grass on the ground a bit too green and too saturated, because it feels a little too overbearing there. Um, so I think for some of your shadows, rather than upping the contrast in those, I'm actually going to make them a bit more desaturated and a bit more yellow. And yeah, that'll feel a little more natural to what's happening here. I'd also watch your edges a bit. I know, again, these are color studies, and it's not crazy important to have nice edges and all that, but I think just a couple areas of uh, greater sharpness is just kind of a general practice to get into for you that I think will help you a lot. So, for instance, here, like when you're dealing with these rocks and stuff like that, just put in just a couple edges of sharper notes, and just by doing that, by taking your time and really carefully adding in just you know 3 or 4 darker notes of kind of crisp, sharp edges, and already you can see how much more clear the whole image looks. You actually don't need to go very clear with everything, but um, taking a few seconds and going in and adding in a couple sharp edges will instantly make the rest of the softness kind of work for you. Um, so for that, again, I think there could be some more light in the shadows, just because I'm pretty sure the photo just doesn't have as much as it should. And also making sure that your atmosphere is working to your advantage. So even though you've kind of got that this is sort of a purpley grayish color, it's also a little bit more bluish. And by doing that, you're pushing this stuff into the background. You're adding in that atmospheric effect that we know should be there, and pushing it more into this background range. And, doing that, yeah, it'll start to feel a little bit more distant that way. So making sure you're getting blue enough in your atmosphere. But overall, really nice. Some tiny little tweaks of color, one way or another. Um, so, oh, sorry. So reference and study. All right, cool. So yeah, looking good. Um, I think I think the thing that's tripping you up is your reference. Is the fact that your reference is really overblown, um, and is giving you an extremely exaggerated sense of light. Because at this time of day, what you're seeing here is, of course, really late afternoon golden light. And so actually nothing in the foreground is being hit by light. And again, this is all just thinking about your reference analytically. And that's something I'm going to encourage everyone to do, and is something that kind of relates to all of this, adding blue to shadows that look too dark and stuff like that, is thinking about the lighting, and thinking about more than just, all right, these are oranges and blues and stuff like that, but thinking about what is actually happening with the lighting. And it's pretty clear what kind of time of day we're looking at here. We're looking at extremely late. If this mountains over here are casting shadows over here, it's very late in the day, and you're getting this really orange golden glow to things. But because of that, none of this foreground would actually be hit by any light like that. It would only be illuminated by the sky. And so it wouldn't be anywhere near the brightness of the light like that. So as you did your study, I think you were influenced partially by that, and by the values and lighting that they had set up in their photograph that are not necessarily true to life. But I think this just comes down to being careful with the reference you're choosing and making sure that it's not throwing you off. So if you just go in here and kind of kill a lot of the contrast that you've set up here in your foreground, and just add in some blue and fade it all out, just because again, they really kicked up the saturation of everything. Everything in this is super saturated. And you could actually just go in here and almost desaturate things a little bit and be better off. And the problem is it kind of throws off everything because everything in this is saturated, when in fact some things should be saturated and some shouldn't. But anyways, the light in this case, where you're dealing with bright kind of golden hour lighting, is that it is going to be super saturated. It's going to be really warm, saturated light here. And you're going to get a lot of color in here. So I actually think you went a little too desaturated with that. That's an area where, that's kind of what the photographer was probably trying to play up, was how saturated these warm lights looked. But for the sake of painting, it's better to just focus on certain areas of saturation. All right, did the stream die, guys? Um, sorry if it did. Oh, there we go. It did die. Let's see here. Sorry about that. Anyways, so going back to this, hopefully you guys can see it now. Let me know if you can. Sorry if it cut out there for a minute. Hopefully you still heard me rambling on. But anyways, I was just talking about this mountain here and making sure that it is in the right color and value range to what we're seeing here, and making sure that it's not getting too bright. Again, you want it to still be darker than actually the sky above it for the most part, and just really kicking up the amount of light that we're getting up here in this area. And then also making sure that our darks aren't getting too dark in that distant area, and that they are being filled in with all of this nice bright blue sky that we've got going on here. And you could even further play up the light by realizing that at the end of the day here, you are going to get a much darker sky than at the middle of the day. And so with the lighting setup you've got, you can go very um, much darker and much more muted with a sky. And so over here on the right, as it gets further and further away from the sun, because again, just thinking about it analytically and thinking about, all right, the sun is off to the left, you can actually get a little bit darker with the sky over here to the right, all just playing up the importance of the light area here. And the light is hitting this one area, and so everything needs to be subordinate to that. As you zoom out really far away, you need to get a sense of the lighting. Yeah, so I think that's kind of how to salvage not great reference. If anything, probably pretty bad reference. Again, landscape photography has a lot of problems, and it's something that we talked about plenty as we did the demo, in that it does have problems. Photographers will kick up saturation, they will change values, they will lighten shadows too much, they will they will change everything to make what they think is a nice photograph. And because of that, that can kind of throw us off as artists trying to paint from that. So just be a little bit more careful with the reference you're choosing. All right, so moving on. Let's see what we got here. All right. So, all right. So I think there's all right. Can you guys hear me all right? Sorry about that. My connection apparently has died again. Um, so sorry about that. Are we all good again? I hope it's working all right. I don't know what the technical problem is, but hopefully it's back up now. Um, yeah, I don't know. Anyways, um, but I think most of the problem here is a problem of values, and making sure that you're getting in, of course, the colors that you need um, into this. And I think part of that is again shifting it a little more towards the blue end of the spectrum, mainly just watching your values, and just like a lot of people have done, making sure that you're not looking too closely at things, and that looking closely at things is making you exaggerate the values that you're seeing. So the dark values up here, at this extreme distance, are actually not going to get all that dark. The value range is actually going to be fairly tight, even when it looks like it's contrasty. That's part of our eyes kind of tricking us into um, uh, thinking there's more contrast than there really is, because we're seeing those tiny variations, and we're noticing them, but we're more than noticing them. We're exaggerating them in our minds. So that's an important thing to be aware of, and to making sure that we don't go too contrasty with our values. So just by painting over this really quickly and bringing that value range to a little closer to what it probably should be, that is to say, pretty tight, and kind of simplifying out some of the, I think, exaggerated curves that you have going on in some of your shapes. It feels much bigger now, and you can kind of tell that just by looking at this. And so I'd say a little bit less contrast, and this is something that I saw in all of them, is a bit too much exaggeration of the values and exaggeration of, um, of the shapes. So making sure that you're not going too far overboard. So just by bringing this back into a reasonable range here, all of a sudden the colors that you have here are working just fine. It's just a sense of over exaggeration, of over analyzing shapes, of over analyzing values, and that kind of throwing you off. And always getting back to that simplification of forms and simplification of shapes, and um, maintaining those tight value ranges. Just like we were talking about in the first week, where all of this would have been in a really tight value range, that sort of similar thing needs to keep happening as we're doing these other color studies and stuff like that. That same lesson applies. And so just being a little bit more aware of that, and I think that applies for kind of all of these in different ways. But I think that would be my general thought on that. Yeah. Moving on to these. Looking good. Looking good. right. Cool. Um, think about what to say here. This one feels pretty good. Not a lot to really add on that. I think it feels about right. There's some small stuff happening with your edges, but again, for a color study, I think it gets about right. Um, and some tiny stuff with your edges, but feeling about right. I think it's when you got into these that there's some stuff that's feeling a little off. The atmosphere on this mountain in the background isn't quite enough. Um, you just kind of squint at it, you can see that there's a little bit more haze going on here, and there's a little more atmosphere than you've got. And because of that, it's important because you're losing out on some of the depth, and you're losing out on some of the atmosphere and scale that a landscape like this has. That's why we need to be careful of maintaining these colors and values and stuff like that, because it's these subtle gradations of things that are often the things that really push our landscapes into having a lot of depth and having a lot of scale and all that. So being extra careful of that. So I think you're missing out on just a little bit of the atmosphere that's happening here. So going back in here and just making sure that you're getting that in there, I think is an important one. Let's see here. What else? There's not too much else on this. I think it feels about right. Perhaps a little bit more consideration of the lights in the shadows. You've got a lot of blue light coming into these shadows, and without going too far out of the value range, you can actually bring in some more of this light, because um, you're actually going to increase your sense of light by, again, decreasing the sense of contrast. Um, so you've got a fairly bright blue sky here. Even though all of this is in shadow, the majority of the piece is in shadow, and means you can kind of key your painting a bit differently and bring in some more of this detail and stuff like this into these shadow ranges. So even though I'm doing this super roughly, I just want to get a sense of these colors that you can bring into this, and you can actually increase the amount of light in your shadows just a little bit. I think I went a little overboard in a couple areas here, but at least at the top here, you can kind of see how this extra blue light in here that's illuminating all this stuff will actually really help. And then as you get into your shadow areas in your light, where it is breaking up this, making sure that you're not going too contrasty with that stuff. Even though it's fairly contrasty in the reference, that's an area that you have to be a little extra careful of, that it's not throwing off things. It's not throwing off those overall value patterns that we have set up. But I think overall really nice. And I think with this, I think you're actually just missing that extra level of polish that will suddenly make this stand out. And there's just a couple things. I think your distance here is not blue enough, and you can go a little bit bluer with this. So I think in this case it's going to shift a little more towards purple. There's not too much atmosphere here, and it's pretty crisp in the distance, but it's just a little bit purple, and that's what you're missing out on to push this into a different range. And then I don't think you're actually getting light enough with your light values um, to adequately show the lighting here. So you've still got some range of your values, and making sure that you're getting the edges right. But you've got some more range of your values here that I actually think you can push a bit. Anytime you've got a cast shadow like this, it is the best thing in the world for showing lighting. Cast shadows that are clear are the greatest gifts ever. They're amazing. So anytime you see a cast shadow like this is the area that you can spend a lot of time on, because getting this edge just right and getting this light to look just right on this cast shadow will make the rest of your painting look good. So I think you've got a bit more value range to use in your lights here to make this look like the intense sunny day that it is. Um, and then I think a little bit more of that blueness in the shadows. Look how cool this shadow is. Because again, it's being hit by all of that light. It's being hit by this really bright blue sky. Even though you've got a really strong, light source here, you've got a really bright sunny day, and you're still getting in a lot of blue into these shadows because all of these shadows are being illuminated by this really intense blue sky that you've got. And so bringing in that coolness to your shadows. And that's what's going to help. It's going to help set off the warmth of everything else you have going on. It's going to set you up for better values for that, and just better color and light overall. And then I think even playing up some of the bounce light and how that's affecting things. Because I mean, if you really look at this, if you really analyze the values, right now your values over here are about the same as your values over here in the shadow area. And that's the thing, is that this is kind of it's a light area. It's being hit by raking light, so it's not in pure sunlight like this is. The light is pretty straight down here, and so you're getting raking lighting. So it's actually a little bit just a bit brighter than what you have here, and that's going to help to darken down the shadow area that you've got on the right. And by having that darker and having that value range set up so that this is a bit brighter, that gives you the range to come in here with more of this bounce light. And this is an area where bounce light is just amazing. When you've got such intense sunny days and hard surfaces like this everywhere and really warm surfaces, you get just ridiculously orange, intense bounce light and things. And really, really pay attention to all this bounce light you're getting in here, because there's just an amazing amount of just beautiful bounce light. And then counteracting that with nice cool shadows as well, and cool cast shadows will suddenly make everything uh, feel a lot brighter, a lot more colorful. So yeah, I think overall, again, really nice, and I think it's just these little things of color and these little things of atmosphere um, will push you to the next level. Yeah. All right. So that's stuff. Let's see what we got here. Good. Hmm. Let's see what we got. I think your colors seem about right. I think you're doing a good job of observing the colors. I actually think it's primarily um, values that are probably throwing you off. I think it's yeah, just some very tiny things with value that are tripping you up. I think there's a few things with color that I think are worth noting, but primarily I'm seeing values being the issue here. So for one thing, I don't know that the relationship of the ground to the sky is quite where it needs to be, and I think it's a very very subtle shift to pushing the sky ever so slightly brighter in a couple areas. And by doing that, it's gonna push our mountain a little more towards feeling grounded there. So making this a bit brighter, not too much. I think you're pretty close to the mark here, and this is just really tiny shifts, but it's these tiny shifts that can make all the difference in the end. And then realizing just how much insane atmosphere you have here. Like there is a huge amount of distance here. This is an extremely epic scale. If you're there in person, it's really far away, and and I don't know that you're getting in enough of that atmosphere and enough of that color in there. So bringing in some more of this kind of bluish haze to these distant shadows and stuff. So even though there's some definite variations in the values and all that, it's all predominantly influenced by this blue haze. And never forgetting about that. Never forgetting about the atmospheric perspective. Atmosphere has a huge effect on color. Always, always, always being careful of that and mindful of that. So you got really, really dark with some of your shadows here. But if you really look at it, these darkest shadows are really just a fairly vibrant blue. It's not even that they're that dark. It's just that in relation to what's around them, they're fairly dark. So that's the other thing that I kind of saw with this is that I actually think that you were a bit too tentative with some of your light values. So this foreground, for instance, can be much, much brighter. That was the first thing that stood out to me is that you can actually go quite a bit more intense with a couple areas here in the foreground. And so bringing in just some brighter values here. You've got the range here that you can go pretty bright with this stuff without it making it feel off or anything like that. You've got some pretty bright rocks here, being illuminated by a really bright sun, scorching sun here, and you're going to get some more of this really intense value range here. And so by doing that, I think you'll realize that you've also got a bit more values that you can use here in the background, and you can go just ever so slightly more contrasty with that. And I think as you do that, your darks, you'll realize that you didn't have to go as dark with them, and that it's the fact that you didn't use all of your brighter value range that I think is what threw you off here. So just going in here with a couple areas of bringing in some lighter values to show off the lighting happening back here. I think that'll just make it feel all just a bit more in range. And then just always remembering atmospheric perspective. Atmospheric perspective is hugely important and is influencing every color and seems to be one of the main things that's tripping people up is making sure that they're seeing all the different colors as they do these studies, but getting this overall feel of being so far away and so influenced by these blues because you've got all these different colors within. You've got colors that seem, green or orange or anything like that. And you've got things that seem like shadows and you've got lights and all these different forms and stuff like that. But when you're dealing with huge amounts of atmospheric perspective like this, all of those things still exist, but are extremely narrow in their color and value ranges. And so bringing this all into a smaller range of color and value will help you a whole lot. Bluer shadows, just in general for pretty much everyone. Really seeing how blue things get and then never forgetting about atmospheric perspective, that as things get really far away, you're still got a lot of that atmosphere happening. And then I think in your case, I think you just didn't quite go bright enough. And I obviously tell a lot of people to get their values back in range of usually darkening things down, but I think you went a bit too dark with things, and you've got some more range of values here. You've got some brighter brights that you can bring in here that will help you because they'll let you make your darks a bit brighter. I think you just went a bit too dark with your shadows, and your lights are a little off because of that. So just some tiny things, but those tiny things push this to a new level. So hopefully that makes sense to you. All right, so moving right along here, get some more really nice ones here. This looks really good. Looking really nice. You did a fantastic job with the colors. The colors are really nicely observed. There's a few areas where you're kind of doing the thing of missing out on some of the atmosphere, but not too much so. I would primarily see it in this one here, where I think again you look too closely at things and didn't look at the overall, and like really squint your eyes and realize that all of these shadow areas, even though they've got all these different little modulations within them, are all kind of in the same color range. They're all in this kind of purpley blue range. And establishing that first and foremost, and everything conforms to that. So just going over this really quickly and just pushing everything into this purple range, and then it's all just variations within that range. So even though you've got something that might look green down there, it's still within that purple range. So it's all in relative color to one another. So it might look green, but it only looks green because of what it's next to. It's not that it actually is green. And that's the thing about color that is so tricky for a lot of people, is that something might look like a color, but not actually be that color in isolation. And that's something we'll see a lot as we've done master studies, and as we do more and more color, is that as you paint something, being very wary of what color it really is, and not just what color it looks like. There's a couple areas that I think you're getting a little too bright with some of your values, and I think are throwing off your lighting. For instance, here, I think reducing some of your value range to accentuate what is important about this, and that is the importance of this kind of backlit and even in this case reflected light happening. There's a lot of kind of wet rocks here, and so there's a lot of reflection going on. So I think exaggerating that effect by reducing your value range in most of the areas to play up that effect a bit more. And also with this sand, making it appear a bit brighter actually by reducing the value range. I think you went a little too bright with it in an effort to make it feel bright. That's a really natural thing for us to do, is that as we paint stuff and want to make it brighter, we try to make it brighter. We try to increase the values. And by doing that, we can actually kill some of the sense of lighting. And it's not always that we get that by increasing our value range. Sometimes we really get it by reducing it. So pushing that down. And then I think for your shadows here, you can actually get a little darker with some of them. And I think that's actually the area where you could increase your sense of lighting, is that I think there's really nice warmth going on in here from some really nice gray kind of warm shadows, as well as just a bit more value range there. So rather than increasing your lights here, I'd rather increase the some of the darkness of your shadow values, and then realizing that all of this stuff could actually be darkened down. And as you darken this down, it's going to make this foreground where it's really being hit by this light stand out even more. So reducing this down even more, just feel a little closer. And I think now that you've got this range, you can go in here and bring in a couple little areas of where it is getting really bright and saturated, rather than going overall with it in every area. Just having one or two areas that are really being hit by that light. Again, very, very tiny things. I think overall you got the right idea. Number of ones here, so looking good. Good. All right. All right. So good. That's really nice. Yeah, I think you did a really good job overall with things. Yeah, you've got some really nice subtle variations of color. With that, it's really nice relations of things. There's not a lot to really add. I think you did a really good job. I think I think it could use just a touch more push in a couple areas, but it's very, very small stuff in that you know, in a couple of these light areas, I think you can actually get a bit brighter and more saturated, just tiny, tiny little things. But um, I think I think overall it felt a little bit muted. And if you bring in a little bit more of this saturation and color and brightness into a couple of these areas, I think it'll feel a bit more illuminated there. Because keep in mind, if you are going to have a very muted thing, getting this to appear really warm and like this golden hour lighting uh, really comes down to um, getting these uh, getting these light areas where it is being hit by light to really shine. And of course, I think over here on the right, you went to white with things because even though you got all this stuff here in the middle, pretty much right, um, I think as you got off to this side, you saw it in isolation and didn't realize that it's fairly similar to some of the stuff you're seeing over here. That it is bright, but it has color to it. It has a lot of color to it. And so even this bright white snow is influenced by the color of this light a lot. And you can kind of key your entire painting off of that, and that you're getting this really nice um, warm light. And so even your white objects that we know are white, that are snow and clouds and stuff like that, don't actually go towards a white color. They go towards this really warm color. And another thing that I'm just going to point out, just because I really like it, but there's this really nice warm glow down here where there's either, you know, light bouncing down in there or whatever else is happening. And that's just a gorgeous thing that I would encourage you to really, really observe, just because it's really nice about the lighting. So it's just something about the reference I personally really like. There's a lot of really nice warmth that's happening down here. Light reflecting down in there, and from you seeing a little bit of reflection of the light above it. But again, really, really tiny stuff. I think here you went a bit too far off with some of your value range, and I think that threw you off in that you know, your shadows here are too bright, and it feels too just overall really, really green. And it's important to balance your greens with all of the other colors in them. So there's lots of yellow and orange and blues and every other color you can think of happening in here. So it's not just green on green on green. And that's probably one of the biggest problems people have when they're working on really green, lush paintings, is that they very quickly just become way too green. And green is a particularly important one to see the variations in, and to see that, all right, there's all these different greens and I need to make sure I'm getting them, and then making sure that your values are also in check. And I think some of your lights in this got too bright, and I think that kind of threw it off and made it feel a little more disjointed than some of your other ones. And I think when you were dealing with this large foreground area, um, you could probably aid from zooming out more and seeing it overall. Because I think as you got into the, you know, tinier and tinier areas, you thought that it needed to be more and more illuminated and stuff. But actually, overall, it's got a certain color and a certain value range. You know, if you were to just do a study from, you know, this far away, what values would you pick and what colors would you pick, and making sure that as you're zooming in more and more and getting closer and closer and doing more and more details, that that same effect that you would have if you were really far away from it is still applied here. Overall, really, really nice stuff. All right, so cool, got some here. I think for these, um, I think you're going too dark with your dark, um, and because of that, it's killing the sense of scale that you should have in these. So for this, for instance, the blues in these distant mountains here um, are going to be a much lighter value. You've got a good relationship of color going on here. You know, you've got much bluer shadows than you do the light, but I think it's a problem of values primarily. I think as you get these values back in check where they are closer in value, I think you'll see that depth kind of come back in these. And this sort of applies for all of them. I think your values, as you're doing the color stuff, I would pay a bit more careful attention to your values and to what your values are doing, and making sure that your values are correct no matter what else is happening in the study. Um, and part of that can be off from the reference you're using, absolutely. Not all the reference is perfect by any means, but making sure that your values are first and foremost correct. And that's something I see in these. So, the probably most important element of lighting and color is first off values, and from there we move into all the different hue and saturation and all that. But if it works in terms of grayscale, then it will work in terms of most of the colors you're picking. And by and large, they do have a good sense of lighting, but the problem is they're a little too exaggerated in terms of their contrasts, and that's killing the sense of the depth and scale that you've got to have in landscapes like these. So it's killing the sense of how far away things are and all that. So being a bit more aware of your values as you do your color studies. All right, so moving right along, looking good, looking really nice. You got some really good stuff going on here. Let me see what I have to say about this. Not too much. I think you've done a really good job. Let's see if there's some overall notes to add here. Um, hmm. Yeah, there's not a lot to say here. I think overall they all feel like the lighting that they should have, and they feel for the most part like the colors they should have too, and that's a really good thing to see. Yeah, I really don't have too much to say here. There's a couple areas where I think your values are a bit off, where you're either getting too dark or too light with things. Like here in the upper left, again, it's partially the problem of the photograph, but the rocky peak here in the distance is getting a touch too dark, and you have to kind of play up the contrasts to make the atmosphere work first of all, and then um, to have the right thing. But again, very tiny things. Uh, yeah, yeah, really not a lot not to say to these. I think you did a really good job. They feel great. They feel like they have the right lighting. They feel like they have the right values, the right colors. Did a good job with all the subtle variations of them. Yeah, fantastic stuff. I wish I had more to add to things, but most things I'm seeing are just really tiny things that are just partially because they're relatively fast studies. But I think you did a really good job. Not a lot to say on this. All right. Cool. She's looking good. I really like a lot of the color stuff you're getting in here. You're getting a really good sense of colors happening here. They have some great variety of color, which is fantastic to see because as we've seen in other ones, it's very easy to see colors and to see the overall color and sometimes miss out on some of the smaller color variations happening. But I think you're doing a really good job of seeing those smaller variations. I think you are missing out on a little bit of the overall form though as you're doing those um, closer inspections of the color, and that is missing out on making sure that the overall value range, the overall color sense, making sure that your lights and shadows are in check and stuff like that. So really going back and making sure that you're simplifying things enough so that they read correctly, while still getting in all of that nice color stuff that's happening. So for instance, I'll just talk about your longer study here, and So for all of this shadow area, you've got all this great variation in here, but making sure that the whole shadow area feels like a shadow area. So, even though you've got all this different color information in here, and all these different values and stuff like that, putting them into a more simplified range so that they can hold together as a shape and hold together as a shadow. So making sure that none of them get too dark or too light or anything like that. And then same goes for the light areas where it's being hit by light and maintaining those within their own range. So I actually think again reducing some of the contrast. So bringing down some of your light areas that I think are getting too bright, and you know filling some of the overly dark tones that I'm seeing and here in some of your light areas that I think are throwing them off. So I think for you, I would say to watch how disjointed things are possibly getting in areas, and to make sure that your colors are kind of in check for everything. Um, for the for the reflection here, um, in general, reflections are going to be darker than what's above them. So always make sure that those are um, in a good relationship with what they are reflecting. So with having the reference in front of me, I shot the reference a few years ago, but based on what I can remember of it, I would say that this could actually get a little bit darker here. So I'd say for you that you're doing a great job of observing all these different colors that are happening. But I think the challenge for you now is to do that while maintaining these closer value ranges and maintaining these overall shapes. Because it's great to get in all the variation, and it's absolutely essential. But you can see here that I've made the sense of form and light actually a fair bit better by reducing the amount of information that you have. That you're going too far with everything, and I think that was the case for most of the studies I'm seeing here. Is that you've got all this great information that you're studying, but you're going too exaggerated with it, and it's just at this point rein it back in a little bit, rein back in the values, and get back to that clarity of values that we talked about in the first week. But really nicely done overall. Again, you're studying the colors really well. You're getting all these great variations of color. But I think getting back to that kind of simplified value range and making that stuff work together, because as you shift it to grayscale, you can see how these start to break apart and they start to feel really disjointed and they lose that sense of light. So as we're doing the color stuff, always think about that value range. So you can see here that as I've reduced this, even as it's in grayscale, it still has this good sense of light to it. So I'd say to be a little bit more careful about your value ranges. Right. These are looking really good. Yeah, these look great. Um, I think for you, overall, really fantastic. They feel great. They're spot on to the lighting schemes that you have set up. I think the only thing is that I think you're missing out on a little bit of the atmosphere in some of them. But even then, I'm seeing a fair bit of it here in the bottom ones, and it's just a couple little areas in the top ones where I don't think you got in enough blue. I think these shadows can be a fair bit more blue. So bring in more of that blue atmosphere stuff, and that'll help. The same goes for this one here. That I don't think you got in enough of the bluish kind of purpley colors in the distance. Um, that's about it. I think overall, again, really nicely done, really nicely observed, and yeah, they feel great. Um, yeah. Again, not a lot to not a lot to add on that. Just look really nice. You did a great job with those. All right, I think these are, yeah, these are the last ones here. All right, sweet. So again, looking nice. Look good. Let's see. Um, yeah, I really think there's probably only a couple of things to add, and I think it's primarily that um, some of your values are still getting a little too dark, and again, partially because of the reference, partially because the reference has some really dark values in it, and so I guess bringing in some more of that information of the light in that, as this thing is getting further away, exaggerating the atmospheric perspective, making sure that you're bringing in a bit of extra light into your painting. The great thing about doing paintings is that you actually do get to bring in more of the shadows and still have actually a greater sense of light, because you can balance these things. And so I'd say that these could be a bit brighter. There's quite a bit more atmosphere here that's happening, and I think you got a little too dark with that, and there's some more distance here that you can get because of that. There's almost another layer that you can see here if you look really closely. And so that's the kind of thing that we do have to look closely at to make sure that we are getting in as much depth as we can. Make sure that that's pushed back, but very small things. This whole area here is very dark in the reference, and obviously you've brought it out a bit, but I think you can even go more with that. And also making sure that you are seeing the light areas that are being hit. Like you actually do have a fair bit of actual, lit areas here. They're not lit by direct lighting, but they are certainly lit, and they do have a lighter value range. So making sure that you're getting in that stuff, getting in the areas where it is being lit. I think that's part of what's throwing you off on that is being aware that even though it is a very small value range, that you still are paying attention to what's in the light and what's in the shadow. There are some definite areas here that are in the light. And then just a couple things with edges and stuff, and being aware of where they should be a little bit crisper and where they should be a bit softer. So always making sure that your edges, when you're meeting the sky, tend to be a bit crisper and more defined, and then kind of losing some of these stray marks that you've got going on. I think they're distracting from some of the stuff you've got going on. So, for instance, here, you've got some of this bright, kind of snowy area here, but it feels like it's more disjointed when it's done kind of roughly like that. And I would say to just perhaps be a little bit more careful and precise with some of your edges. And I know obviously we're doing just color and lighting studies here, but I think that's just something in general to be aware of. But really, I think exaggerating some of the light being brought into these shadow areas is a good thing. And then, like for instance, here, this whole grassy area, you've done a pretty good job on the lighting and making sure that it's in the right value. But you've also got to see how there's this nice gradation of value as it goes from the bottom to the top. It actually gets quite a bit brighter, and that actually helps with that sense of light. And I'll kind of explain the effect of why this is happening, why it's actually getting brighter as we get further away. Actually, as we get into water, a similar thing happens to water. But I'll explain the technicalities of why on earth this is happening as we get into that. It's a bit of an odd effect, but it's something you actually see more often than you might think. And I think there's probably a bit more room for some atmosphere here. Like this stuff is feeling like it's coming far too close to us. And here in the reference, you can see this kind of epic scale you've got going on here. And that's coming just from the crazy amounts of atmosphere that is happening here. So much atmosphere because there's so much distance here. And it's this nice early morning light, being hit by this sun and all this atmosphere here and really illuminating it and making the stuff feel really far away. So being sure that you get in enough of that atmosphere, I think is also important. So yeah, I think that about does it for those. Overall, feels pretty good. I'd say one last thing of making sure that your lighting here uh, feels like, again, these simplified light and shadow shades. So realizing where of these greens is being hit by light and where is being hit by shadow, and really clarifying these things, because I think you're getting a bit messy with these things. And by simplifying what you've got, having a little less texture, a little less brushwork, and simplifying things down to just even two colors, two values, and seeing what you can do with just that simplified range, you can see how much more light you can get in there. So yeah, just tiny things, but I think will help. So I think that about wraps us up for this critique. So we managed to get through everybody's stuff, and again, I think some of the kind of overarching themes that we've seen today are certainly the effects of atmospheric perspective on color and how important it is to maintain that. How important value is, of course, and making sure that your values are always in check. Making sure that as you're doing longer studies, that you're always being aware of the overall effect and not getting too uh, close in on your observations where it's throwing off your values of the overall thing. So being very careful of that. And yeah, I think that's kind of the main points that I'm seeing here, and the main stuff that yeah is throwing some people off. But overall, really good work. Love the stuff you guys are doing. It's fantastic stuff. I hope you all are learning a lot by doing these. Hopefully, you'll feel a bit more comfortable about color, so that when we dive into that after our break, that we will you'll come up with some great color schemes for that. So yeah, so as of the end of next week, we'll go on break. We will of course do another critique next week of all of your thumbnails, and we just won't have a new demo for next week. So try to get your homework done on time, and so we can take a look at all of those thumbnails you've done. And yeah, so good work, guys, and I will see you next week for the critique.